How is the offensive line going to be constructed? Who is going to fill in those first two games at the running back position without John Emery? Who is playing quarterback for this team? Going to try to answer all of those questions and some of our biggest takeaways from the past few days of fall camp on today's edition of Locked On LSU.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. My name is Caroline Fenton, and I'm your host, as I am every day. I'm an LSU alum. I've been covering LSU football for the past few years, and I'm now a sports talk radio host in Nashville, Tennessee. You can find me on Twitter at CarolineFenton1. But make sure to keep up with the podcast as well. You can follow us on Twitter at Locked On LSU. You can also find us on YouTube. So while you can find us on your preferred podcast platform, Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Music, whatever you like to use, you can also watch the podcast. You can throw it up on your smart TV. You can watch it on your phone, on YouTube as well. So you can find us at Locked On LSU. Now, I want to get into everything that we've learned over the past couple of days at fall camp. But first and foremost, the biggest tidbit of news that came out over the weekend is that John Emery Jr., LSU running back, is now currently ineligible for the first two games of the season, the opener against Florida State and then at home against Southern. It's a little bit of a carryover of the academic ineligibility from 2021. So here's the thing, it's in addition to sitting out in 2021 because of academic ineligibility. This is not an additional punishment. This is just carryover, essentially, that we have just been informed of just now. So let's go back to 2020, whenever he was deemed academically ineligible. His stepfather was dealing with COVID, so he took a step away from school, a step away from football to help his family as his stepfather was in the hospital battling COVID-19. So Fades took a hit from that. And during 2020, I think there were so many things in all facets of life where we were all a little bit more tolerant or understanding of certain things than maybe we have been in the past. And football was one of those things. Because in 2020, the NCAA was granting all sorts of understandings, I guess, or, if you are out for a game or came back for a game or transferred because of COVID, whatever it was, if it involved COVID, the NCAA was so much more understanding in 2020, as they should have been. So John Emery Jr. Appealed the academic ineligibility, saying, I've been dealing with some family issues. My stepfather's dealing with COVID, has been battling COVID, and that wish was denied. So, of course, out the 2021 season, and now will be sitting out the first two games of the 2021 season. So he's going to appeal it to the NCAA if he has not already. So we'll probably hear some updates of exactly what that looks like within the next couple of days. Of course, that's something that we're going to be monitoring. But before we get into how this affects LSU on the football field, I just want to take a time to say, shame on the NCAA. Shame on this institution who claims to always be pro-student athlete, to be protecting the student, protecting the athlete, protecting the person, to make sure that every student athlete in the NCAA has all the resources that they need, that they're taken care of, that it's, hey, whatever's good for the student athlete, that's what we want. Well, John Emery Jr. has been academically eligible since November of 2021. So if he has served his time, his punishment of being academically ineligible throughout the entirety of the 2021 season, and his grades fit the bill, and he meets the standards and has done that since November 2021, then what's the NCAA doing here? What are they trying to get at here? Because to me, this doesn't seem very pro-student athlete. Now, if John Emery Jr. continued to, his grades continued to slip and he still wasn't meeting that threshold that he needed to in order to be eligible to play, then I would understand. And I would say, you know what? John Emery Jr. needs to take a step away from football because he has to focus on school, because that's what he has to do, because he is a student. To be able to play football, you have to be a student. And I would say, hey, that's on John Emery Jr. for not being able to get his grades up, for not using the resources at his disposal. I would get that, but that's not the case. To me, this seems like a classic case of the NCAA just trying to flex whatever power they have left. Once NIL was ruled unanimously by the Supreme Court to be legal and to be adopted into the NCAA's bylaws and guidelines, I think the NCAA felt an enormous feeling of, what are we even here for anymore? You know? That the NCAA just felt so obsolete that they had no power whatsoever. So instead of letting a student athlete who is academically eligible play, they continue to flex their power and say, no, actually, you know what? An entire season wasn't enough. You have 2 more games. It's not right. And it's not fair. And it's not me saying, well, it's not fair because it's the player who plays for the team that I root for in the school that I went to. That's not the case at all. I would say this for any student athlete who was deemed academically ineligible and is now eligible and continued to have to sit out. What's the point there? What are you trying to get at other than just punish a kid for not meeting the grade requirements in an incredibly confusing and scary year for a kid whose family member was suffering from COVID-19 and was in the hospital, who had much bigger things going on in his life than football? You're going to continue to punish him for that. It's a bad look for the NCAA, for an institution, like I said, that continues to be pro-student athlete. Doesn't seem very pro-student athlete here. But let's get into the football side of things, because this obviously leaves LSU with 1 fewer running back in a position group that, I feel like it's fine. The depth right now is fine, but you take John Emery away, and that concerns me a little bit. And it's only 2 games. It's Florida State and it's Southern. And Noah Cain and Armani Goodwin on Thursday and Saturday in those scrimmages, those were the 2 backs that were taking the majority of the first team reps. That John Emery Jr. was coming in with the 2s and 3s. So you could look at it and say, okay, well, yeah, it's just a depth piece that's being taken away. Well, I don't completely submit to that idea, because I think the LSU is going to be fine for those first 2 games with just Noah Cain and Armani Goodwin and the rest of this running back group. They're going to be fine. But with the way that I think that Mike Denbrock and Brian Kelly want to utilize this running back position, I think it puts them in a really difficult spot, especially at the beginning of the season, whenever you're still trying to figure out your offense, whenever your quarterback, whether it's Garrett Nussmeier or Jaden Daniels, are trying to get used to this new system, to this new team. You're probably going to want to defer to running the ball a good bit, just in case, to have that to lean back on while you're still getting your legs underneath you, and while there's still a freshman left tackle that's trying to acclimate to college football. Don't you think you'd like to be able to lean on the run game just a little bit to afford yourself some time while your guy under center is trying to get used to his offensive lines, trying to get used to his receivers? There's only so much that you can emulate in practice. Once you get in that real game situation, you kind of want to be able to have a little bit of insurance. And I've said for a while now, I really do think that Brian Kelly and Mike Denbrock aren't going to lean on one running back. It's not going to be, this one guy, you hand the ball off and go, and that's your running back. I think they're going to want to run a running back by committee, and not having John Emery Jr. in those first 2 games, those 2 very critical games, I think is going to hurt the way that they're going to want to do that. And this is Brian Kelly on Saturday about the running back room, kind of reacting to the news of John Emery Jr.'s ineligibility in the first 2 games.
You guys know the situation with John Emery. I really can't get into the specifics of that because of the Buckley Amendment, but he's certainly a guy that's going to be part of what we do this year. Then Noah Cain, as I mentioned, was really impressed with him today. Amani is a guy that we're going to count on. Williams has been probably as consistent as any back that we've had. And Nick Demas has done a really nice job. So, Leonard Fournette is not in that backfield. We don't have like that marquee guy, if you will, but all of them, complement each other very well. And I think we'll be very effective at that position. And I think each one of them can contribute in a manner that, will allow us to be successful at the position.
So I think there he's basically lining out, hey, they're all going to be able to contribute. And he says they're all going to complement each other really well. That, to me, that screams running back by committee. That means Noah Kane, Armani Goodwin, John Emery Jr., they're all going to see the field probably in the same game. They're all going to, play in different packages. They're all going to be in different downs. Who's going to be the third down back? Who's going to be that pass catching back? Who's just going to be the go-to play action guy? And I think they're all going to fit into this system. They're all going to use each of their tools to be able to play that different kind of back. It's just not going to be that one guy that I think we all are so accustomed to seeing. The Leonard Fournettes, as Brian Kelly mentioned, the Darius Geises, the Clyde Edwards-Helaire's of the past. It's going to be more so, different running backs playing different roles. And they can get through 2 games without John Emery contributing to those roles. You just heard Brian Kelly listing off 5 different running backs who can contribute to the system. But it's the depth that concerns me a little bit. It's not 1A of my concerns of, the Florida State game and the way this offense is going to kind of pan out. But it is just another thing that I'm going to be looking at and another crutch that LSU's offense won't have in these very critical games. But coming up next, there's another position group that's been really interesting to follow, and I don't think that it's even close to being figured out. Or is it? I want to get into that coming up next. But before we do that, I want to tell you about BetOnline, because betonline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your betting needs. You can find all of your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. You can find reviews and news of every league. They've got MLB, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. Go ahead and get your NFL futures in, your college football futures in, because that is my favorite way to start the football season. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all of your sports betting information. They've got live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They've got you covered. So head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today. BetOnline, where the game starts. Well, thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. And I got to let y'all know that the ultimate college football preview is here. It's a 7-episode preview with college experts, local team experts, and Odyssey college football insiders. They've got everything you need to be ready for the college football season, all in one spot. So search for Ultimate College Football Preview on your Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you podcasts. John Emery Jr., at least for right now, as it currently stands, John Emery Jr. will be out of the Florida State and the Southern games. We'll be back for that week 3 against New Mexico. But it's a little bit concerning for the first couple of games, because I know that, let's say Jaden Daniels just needs, I said third game was New Mexico. I meant Mississippi State. I understand what I mean. Anyways, I'm a little bit concerned about it. It's not panic button. It's not absolute 911 emergency, but it is just a little bit of a crutch that's no longer there for Jaden Daniels or Garrett Nussmeier, whoever does get the starting nod against Florida State. That's not there in the run game. So that is on the table, and we'll continue to monitor John Emery's appeal to the NCAA as well. But another very interesting aspect of this LSU team is the offensive line. So up until Saturday, pretty much the entire first-team offensive line had been the same. The make of it had been the same. So it was Will Campbell at left tackle, Tremont Shorts at left guard, Garrett Dellinger has been that center pretty much consistently, Miles Frazier at right guard, Anthony Bradford at right tackle. So Brian Kelly, is that going to be your starting offensive line? Is that set?
Do you think your first offensive line is settled?
No. There's still opportunities. Cam Wire is still in the picture. Dummerville is just getting back with an ankle. Those 2 guys are still competing. And then, Turner is still in competition. So I'd say those 3 guys in particular are still vying for an opportunity. We'll make some Saturday, we'll move that group around a little bit. We're going to move Bradford inside. We'll kick Cam Wire out to tackle. So there's still some moving around on that offensive line to see what the best 5 guys are.
So, and that was Brian Kelly on Thursday after their scrimmage. So on Saturday, he did exactly what he said he was going to do. He was going to shift things around. So like I said, previously, before Saturday, Will Campbell at left tackle, Tremont Shorts left guard, Garrett Dellinger at center, Miles Frazier at right guard, and Anthony Bradford at right tackle. Now, things switched up a little bit on Saturday, as Brian Kelly mentioned. Cam Wire filled in that right tackle position in place of Anthony Bradford. He took some reps there. Anthony Bradford moved to right guard. Garrett Dellinger remained at that center position. I think that's going to emerge as your starting center. Miles Frazier moved into left guard in place of Tremont Shorts, moved from right guard over to the left side, and Will Campbell was in at left tackle. So those two consistent spots of Garrett Dellinger at center and Will Campbell at left tackle. I think those two spots are pretty much set. I think Miles Frazier has a starting spot on this offensive line, at guard, whether that's the right side or the left side. But I think it's interesting that Anthony Bradford was moved in from right tackle inside to right guard, and Cam Wire was brought in at right tackle. I do wonder what was the motivating factor behind that. Was Anthony Bradford not able to play tackle and had to move inside and maybe take a little bit of a lighter workload in at guard? Tackle is more difficult. Tackle takes a brunt of the force from that opposing defensive line. So did they look at Anthony Bradford, say, hey, maybe he's not fit to be a tackle, move him inside, try Cam Wire out at tackle? Or was it just to test a little bit of the versatility to say, hey, can Anthony Bradford work inside or out? Can Miles Frazier work on the right side or the left side? And just move things around just in case when it comes to game week, if there's injury or whatever it might be, knock on all the wood, just to see where these offensive linemen can play, where they can plug in and contribute. Can they go on the right side? Can they go on the outside? So I think that's going to be kind of interesting to monitor from these practices as they unfold, is who are the consistent players at each position. Right now, Garrett Dellinger at center, Will Campbell at left tackle. I think those are set. And do you start to see Cam Wire a little bit more at that right tackle position? Is Anthony Bradford going to truly be a guard? Will Miles Frazier be on the right side or the left side? And all of those things are kind of nitpicky, but to at least have a couple different guys to be able to fill in those guard and those right tackle positions, I think are key. You want a versatile offensive line, and to be able to see guys who can play multiple positions, I think is a good thing. And when you have a versatile offensive line, I think overall that is a good thing. But the interesting thing that I see here is Garrett Dellinger, assistant center. Was Brian Kelly after practice on Thursday and after reports on Thursday. I kind of thought that maybe they would try a different player in at center because of some of the issues that Garrett Dellinger has been facing. This was Brian Kelly after practice on Thursday.
I was probably a little, I think we're at this point in practice 12 where I'm very demanding, and will be, from 12 all the way to the first game. He's going to be fine. It's really just about what we're asking him to do is a lot more now other than snapping. If he was just snapping the ball, he'd be fine. But we're asking him to call out the front. He's making the checks. He's gone from playing, guard to center. And so this is a culmination now of all of that being, piled on. And he actually feels comfortable snapping it now. And so he's not paying attention to the details of it. So we'll get it worked out. I'm not concerned about it, but I have to stay on him and make sure that he's aware that it affects the timing of the offense.
So Garrett Dellinger is asked to play a position. He came in at left guard and left tackle for LSU in his true freshman season, and really emerged in his true freshman season as being, a solid guy on the offensive line as a true freshman. So coming into his sophomore year, being asked to take on a much larger workload, I think you expect to see some of those growing pains there. I understand that. I don't blame him for, needing a little bit of time to get acclimated, because as the center, you're asked to do a lot. I mean, you're the quarterback of the offensive line. You're the CEO of the offensive line. You need to be the brain of the quarterback. You guys need to be on sync. So I think that's going to be a difficult hurdle for Garrett Dellinger to get past. I don't blame him for going through those woes. But he had consistent bad snaps on Thursday and Saturday. And it was well documented that was on quarterback situation. But I was surprised to see that there was no other center in that rotation. I think that they're married to Garrett Dellinger, and I think that shows that this coaching staff says, hey, he's gonna have to go through a little bit of growing pains. He's gonna have to learn, but a few bad snaps in practice, we think that he is still the best option at center. That makes me a little bit nervous because we are 2 weeks away from Florida State. You can't have a bad snap in a game. I mean, you can't have a bad snap against Ole Miss or Auburn or Florida State or Alabama or Tennessee. It doesn't matter. You can't have those kinds of little mistakes or those fundamental mistakes in a game setting. So I do think that he's going to be able to adopt into this center position and that he's going to be able to, be able to have this marriage of snapping the ball and also calling out plays and also blocking as well. The center's asked to do a lot of different things, but that's a little concerning to me that if there seems to be consistent bad snaps in practice, once you get into, the rest of the practices this week and next week, and he's still kind of trying to get his feet underneath him, that is going to be a little bit concerning going into the season. But it's something that we're just going to focus on, something that we're going to keep an eye on throughout the rest of practice is how Garrett Dellinger is able to be able to snap the ball, to be able to have, consistent good snaps and also add on to the rest of this workload that Brian Kelly and Mike Denbrock and the rest of his coaching staff has asked him to do. But coming up next, the biggest question that we'll continue to talk about until the question is answered, and that is the quarterback position, because Brian Kelly spoke on that on Saturday after practice. So what's next for this quarterback position? We'll get into that after a couple words from our sponsors. Well, thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. So it's been the Jaden Daniels and the Garrett Nussmeier show, back and forth over practices on Thursday and Saturday, and as they continue to practice and scrimmage throughout the rest of fall camp. Now, it has emerged that Jaden Daniels is taking a majority of those first team reps, and no, they haven't named a starting quarterback, and no, they actually might name one soon. I mean, we'll see, because I do want to get into what Brian Kelly had to say about the quarterback position, but before we get into that, I want to just go ahead and say starting quarterback's going to be Jaden Daniels. I mean, I thought that was going to be the case a few months ago. I thought that was going to be the case after Miles Brennan decided to retire, after Jaden Daniels and Garrett Nussmeier were each getting first-team reps, and it's kind of unfolding that Jaden Daniels is getting majority of those first-team snaps in practice. I feel pretty confident saying, I've said it before, and I'm going to continue to harp on it now, Jaden Daniels is going to be the starting quarterback of this football team. I feel pretty good about that. Don't hold me to it, but I feel like that's probably going to be the case. But this is Brian Kelly on Saturday about the quarterback competition and how he sees it playing out, not just through the rest of camp, but through the rest of the season as well.
It's pretty clear that it's Nussmeier and it's Daniels, and they just have more experience, than Walker Howard. Walker's done a great job, but I think his situation now would be an emergency situation, and can we redshirt him? Right, that's kind of where we're at right now. So it's a two-man race, and it's extremely competitive. Jalen does some really good things. Obviously his ability to get the ball out of his hands quickly. It's not just a guy that runs. He threw the ball at a 65% completion ratio last year. Pushed the ball down the field very well today. Nuss made some really good plays as well. Unblocked edge player coming at him, gets the ball out of his hands. So this is going to be. Look, I wouldn't be surprised if they both get the opportunity to play it sometime this year, but we're going to have to name a starter, and that's going to happen here pretty quickly.
Couple things there. First and foremost, I think Brian Kelly just called Jalen. Not his name, but that's all right. Whole lot of guys on this team, whole lot of names. But also, first and foremost, addressing at the beginning of that clip, says it's between Jaden Daniels and Garrett Nussmeier. Breaking news. I think that's something that we all knew was going to happen. I think we all knew that was going to be the case, that Walker Howard, albeit a wonderfully talented quarterback, and based off of all the discussions that I've had with media members that have been out at practice, he's going to be really freaking special one day. He just doesn't have the experience that Jaden Daniels and Garrett Nussmeier have. So afford Walker Howard that redshirt season, afford him the opportunity to sit on the bench and learn and get acclimated to college, get acclimated to this playbook, and then he'll be able to come in when it's time and take that starting job. We all knew that. We knew that was going to be the case. At the very, very, very beginning of the spring, we all knew that it was going to be a three-man race between Jaden Daniels, Garrett Nussmeier, Miles Brennan, and then Walker Howard was going to redshirt. So thank you for the delayed confirmation, Brian Kelly. But I think what I took away from that was Jaden Daniels is able to push the ball down the field. You know, he named off his stats at Arizona State because he has experience doing it. Although Garrett Nussmeier has done some really great things and shown some really great flashes in practice, as Brian Kelly had just mentioned. And because Garrett Nussmeier is a really good quarterback, and because he has a lot of talent, he wouldn't be competing for this job if he didn't. But Brian Kelly mentions the experience factor as to why Nuss and Jaden Daniels are getting the nod over Walker Howard. Well, if we're going to talk about experience, Jaden Daniels just has more of it. But the most interesting part of that clip is that Brian Kelly said, I wouldn't be surprised if you saw both of them at the field at some point this year. And I don't think that he wants to run a true two-quarterback set where it's, one quarterback comes in for certain down situations, another quarterback comes in for another. For example, if Garrett Nussmeier comes in a second and long situation, is able to get a first down or isn't able to convert to a first down, Jaden Daniels comes in a third down situation. I don't know what it might be. I don't know. Fourth and goal, Jaden Daniels comes in, runs the ball in, 1st and 10, Garrett Nussmeier moves the ball down the field. I don't know. I'm not an offensive coordinator. I don't think it's going to be that. I don't think it's going to be that. I do think it's going to be Jaden Daniels gets the start against Florida State, and I do think it's going to be, hypothetically speaking, October 8th in Tiger Stadium playing Tennessee. Jaden Daniels continues to get shut down. They stop the run. Garrett Nussmeier comes in at the half, and he's able to finish out the game and get the ball galled on the field and is able to win the game through the air. I think that's what it's mostly going to be like. Jaden's the starter, Garrett Nussmeier if need be, or Garrett Nussmeier gets a start, against UAB later on in the season to get him some of those starting reps. I wouldn't be surprised if that's what it is. Not necessarily a true two-quarterback system, but a system in which you have a really good quarterback as a starter, and you have another really good quarterback as a backup, and whoever that might be. And that's a really good position to be in, to know that if you have a quarterback go down, or if you have a quarterback that's not able to execute the plays like you need him to, you got another guy who's able to come in and has a very good skill set, albeit different skill set, both very good quarterbacks. And I think that's a good situation to be in. But that's going to do it for me today. Thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. So break down a lot on the offense today. Coming up tomorrow, I want to break down what defensive coordinator Matt House thinks about the defense and what we've seen from the defense in practice over the past couple of days. So we'll get into that later this week. But you can get more on the SEC by making Locked On SEC your second listen. Every day, host Chris Cordy and the local experts of Locked On take you across the SEC in 30 minutes. So make sure to make Locked On SEC your second listen.